Ah, video game manuals. These little booklets used to be a staple in video games, giving you something to read when you were bored or maybe on your way home from buying the video game. But this little booklet also included important in-game information such as controls for the game, characters, backstory, and in-game items. Nowadays, you're more likely to open a box to a loose piece of paper promoting DLC, a literal ad for a different game, or nothing. Or maybe you just bought your game online instead of making the trek to the store. A common sentiment for gamers online is a longing for a time when game manuals were included with games. Now, the disappearance of these manuals makes you wonder, why are they gone? Were they even important in the first place? Why are you making this video? Well, I'm here to answer 2, maybe even 3 of those questions. It's time to look into the history of the video game manual, their decline in the industry, and where they stand today. Let's go! In the beginning, there was Pong. A game so simple, you didn't need a manual. You just move the rectangle up and down your side of the screen and keep the ball from flying off. Easy enough, right? Well, yeah, but it still did come with a manual overviewing setup, how to use the controllers, and how to play the game. This was helpful considering video games were relatively new at this point in time, and most people had never seen, let alone held and played with, a video game controller in their lives. Now, a few years down the line, video games had grown and evolved. Rather than a simple display of just a few pixels, it was now more than a few pixels, which was now creating a world and telling a story. Games had become more complicated. Not quite as complicated as today's AAA titles, but still more complicated than just, well, this. Still, they really couldn't be all that complicated anyways, considering the original Legend of Zelda was only 128 kilobytes, which is insane in comparison to the 86 gigabytes of Spider-Man 2 and the 100 plus gigabytes of games like Baldurs Gate 3 and Red Dead Redemption 2. Noting the size of these games, it's important to remember that these games did not have the whole tutorial built into the game like today's do. Most of these games would just drop you straight into gameplay, maybe giving you a quick snippet of text overviewing your goals for the game. The original Legend of Zelda literally tells you in the intro to reference the manual for more details on the game. So, for these older games, without the manual, you might have a lot less idea of what is going on in the game. While this can be a good thing in some cases, allowing for more discovery and exploration and problem solving on the player's part, it can also lead to a trickier game if you're not up for the challenge. Generally speaking, manuals were a necessity for games of this time. The manuals would give the player the rundown on how to move, how to block, how to attack, how to use items, what those items did. And they would also add important context on the game's world and characters. At first glance, these games are just some pixel sprites on a screen. But what game is it? In some cases, a lot of that storytelling and that build-up and that context would just have to be done in the manual. That being said, there was still flavor text, like some dialogue here and there, some tidbits you can read, all this stuff that would still build the world around you. But it obviously wasn't as in-depth as games today. You know, there wasn't 337 books you could find hidden throughout the world to read, like in Skyrim. And there weren't long cinematic cutscenes like in every game. A good example of world building done in a game manual can be seen in the manual for the original Legend of Zelda. In the midst of this chaos, in a little kingdom in the land of Hyrule, a legend was being handed down from generation to generation. The legend of the Triforce. Golden. Clocking in at a cool 46 pages, this manual gave helpful hints on defeating Ganon, some cute little pieces of art, as well as helpful in-game tips for saving, starting games, and how the controls work. And this manual even included a map of the game's world. And some of the design and writing in these little manuals, it's really cool. Most of them at the time were full color. They're really interesting to look at, they're really interesting to read, and people put a lot of time into making these things. Jim Sangster, a manual writer for games such as Spyro the Dragon 2, Final Fantasy VII, and Crash Team Racing, said in an interview with Will Nelson from NME, "I needed to make sure that every manual was clear and consistent, and had that same basic flow. It was then, within that framework, that I could have a bit of fun." He would receive some not quite finished game discs to play through, as well as some production documents for the game he would be writing for. From there, he could get kind of silly with it, introducing the world, characters, and controls in a way that was still interesting for the player to read. He noted that sometimes it's an awareness that no one's going to read it, but I'm just having fun with it. which is kind of my outlook on these videos. So lots of work went into these manuals, oftentimes to make up for the lack of space in the game itself for all this storytelling and world building. But even as games got bigger, these manuals still hung on for a while longer. Most games continue to have full color manuals included in their boxes, like Nintendogs, released in 2005. It wasn't really until the 7th generation of consoles, those Xbox 360s and PlayStation 3s, that we really started to see manuals start to decline in popularity. In 2010, Ubisoft announced that it would no longer be including paper manuals with their games in an attempt to be more environmentally friendly. Whether or not the friendliness to the environment was a front to mask the fact that they did not want to spend more money on producing and creating and printing and including these manuals in their games, or if they actually did care about their carbon footprint, is up for debate. At this time though, video game manuals were getting thinner and not really even a given in video game boxes anymore. Big games that were released around this time, like Dead Space and Assassin's Creed 2, didn't even come with a manual, just a pamphlet with no manual in sight. So why this shift away from paper video game manuals? A couple reasons. Remember when we talked about how little baby tiny that games were? Well, now they grew up and they're big. Really big. You know what we can do now? Movie-like cutscenes, a lot of dialogue, jillion polygons. Cool! And the people behind these games were able to start to include tutorials within the game itself. So rather than opening the manual and seeing press A to pick up the egg, you would now play through the game. And it goes press A to pick up the egg. Most games of then and today would start to tie the tutorial into the world building and storytelling of the game itself. For example, in Uncharted Drake's Fortune, released in 2007, players start off the game on a boat. Here we open with a cutscene. This introduces the game's world and characters. We learn a little bit about Nate and Elena and what they're doing on the boat and why they're in the middle of the ocean. And then wait, what is that? Enemies? The game just throws you right into it. Press L2 to aim, press R2 to shoot, press circle to hide behind objects. You learn that enemies killed by brutal combo drop more ammo. The game walks you through these details while you play it. Did Uncharted Drake's Fortune come with a manual? Yes, it did. It's cool and well designed too, but unlike the original Zelda game, it doesn't really go into every detail of every weapon in the game or every item in the game and what they do, but it doesn't really have to. The game is able to communicate these ideas and these rules to the player through gameplay, and oftentimes even more effectively than a paper game manual ever could. So, the humble paper manual died out. Where does that leave us? Well, as we are aware, paper manuals are not really included in video games these days, save for special releases or maybe some add-ons for indie games occasionally. But for the most part, manuals were killed. But then again, when was the last time you waited outside of a GameStop or whatever for the latest release of a game? Why do that when you could just download it the minute it comes out at home? 2020 was the first year where digital game sales surpassed that of physical sales. You can probably take a guess as to why that was the case, but even so, digital downloads are the main way that people get their games these days. In 2022, over 70% of video game sales were digital. And honestly, it makes sense. As much as I love having a stack of game boxes so I can look at all the shit I own, it is nice to just have everything already loaded onto your console and ready to play. Going back to manuals here, if games still did come with paper manuals, would we still even need or want them? If manuals were still included in games, it could be a cool way to showcase some concept art, or go more in depth into the lore or some of the characters' stories. But typically these days, if that does exist, it is all online. So it makes you think. Do we just want these manuals for the nostalgia? In some cases, it might just be that. Typically these days, everything you need to know about the game is in the game. Whether it's through tutorials or cutscenes, the game will show you how to play the game. And you get to actually do it, which can actually be helpful in remembering the controls and uses of items. As for story, any story that needs to be conveyed to the player can be done so really well using the game. All that being said, I'm obviously not like, fuck paper game manuals, they suck ass. It's like, okay, sure. But I'm also not like, well, every game should have a game manual, why are they all gone? It's like, there's a balance. Generally speaking, game manuals wouldn't really add anything to games if they were included today. But wait, don't go down the comments. there are still games that include manuals, and they do a really cool job of incorporating them into their games. I've got 2 examples here. Stick with me. We've got The Banished Vault, and we've got Tunic. The Banished Vault was developed by LoFiDavid and published by BitHell Games. Alexis Ong from Polygon describes the game as having the same spiritual vibes as that math problem that requires moving a group of people and a hungry lion between 2 islands in 1 boat. This 46-page manual is well crafted, mixing in cross-hatched black and white drawings of different elements in the game to, I don't know, give it some more atmosphere maybe? It's pretty cool. The manual is included virtually with the game since it is released and sold on Steam, but they did put in the work to create a physical version for people to buy if they'd like to. It's pretty cool. Last thing, another example of a good game with a manual is Tunic. Though it doesn't have a manual in the traditional sense, they've done a really cool thing with it, I think. Rather than having it readily available for the player at the get-go of the game, telling them how to do all the stuff in the game, telling them what everything does, where everything is, and all that junk, you're dropped into the world with little context. But as you explore more of the map in the game, you can start to intuit and put together all the pieces of this little puzzle the devs have created for you and start to understand more of what's going on in the game. It does draw on classic games like The Legend of Zelda in a you figure it out kind of way. It's well made, it's cute, and it's hard, baby. That shit's hard. So, paper manuals might be dead. But maybe that's okay. Is that a bummer? Sure. But definitely isn't the end of the world. Got other things spurring that on. I'm done now. I'm done talking. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give her a like, and feel free to let me know in the comments your favorite game manual, because as I was researching for this video, there's actually a lot of cool ones, so I'm sure you are a real gamer and know more than I do. So, go for it, but don't be mean, please be nice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe and also watch another one of my videos. I have like 3 other ones that are like half watchable, so like, I don't know. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time where I film, but there's enough light in the day to finish filming and it's not dark out because it's dark. Bye!